you're going through all this, right? Because 10 is a very young age,
Yeah.
right? To be everything. But for those who don't know, for sexual child abuse, it's not really that young. It seems to be
Mhm.
around the age where a couple of years before puberty, where the person is beginning to discover their own body, and they're beginning to trust themselves and see themselves in a different way. This was someone for you, from what you've told me and from what I know, was you're kind of happy, excited to have them around because now it's someone that is, I don't want to say is giving you the attention, but it's someone that you have a positive experience, at least in the
Yeah.
beginning, right? And
Right.
one thing I want to ask you, because I spoke to someone else and they were a sexual abuse victim as well, but later on in life. And I asked them, how was your confidence at that point? And the
Mm.
answer they gave me was interesting. They're saying that, you know what? I didn't have any confidence in myself.
Mm.
Is that a
Yeah, I don't think I
commonality?
had a concept. I don't think I have it. I don't even think I had that idea of confidence as 10. I could potentially project back through my adult lens to try to think about that, but I don't, particularly in the 80s and particularly in Oklahoma. Like we weren't working on this higher conscious level. Like these kids, man, these babies today, oh my gosh, right? They are so evolved and they're so with it and they're so, doing affirmations already at 3 and all these beautiful things, which is wonderful. I think I was simple in that way. It was family. I was just getting up, running around in the woods, playing in my backyard, going across the street to the playground. I was just a kid. I didn't have like these ideas about I'm supposed to feel confident, or we didn't talk about these concepts in my family. And so what is true is that, and I think this is often very much the case, is that ultimately children are socialized to trust the adults in their life and to
Absolutely.
trust the judgment and the actions and the behaviors of the adults. They know better, they know what's going on. And so, what I can say is that when my grandfather began to abuse me, uh, it was easy in the sense to default to, well, this just must be okay, because he wouldn't, even though part of me was afraid and part of me was confused and part of me was hurting, I would, rationalize that or push that away through the lens of like, but he's the adult, so this must be okay, or there must be a reason. And it really wasn't until many, many, many months later, we were out on the front porch and my aunt drove into the driveway unexpectedly and he snatched his hands away from me really quickly. And that was the first time it dawned on me that, uh-oh, he thinks he's doing something wrong. He doesn't want anybody else to know about this. And so now here comes in more of the confusion. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but that's what
No,
comes
it
to
does.
mind
It
in
it,
response to
it, it
that.
does
Yeah.
because you're in a situation where the confusion is
Yes.
replacing what is at the end of the day at 10, you should be, like you mentioned, you should be running in the forest, having fun, full of smiles, like we are today. For those who can't see,
Mhm.
big smiles, everything, right?
Yeah.
That's how it should be at 10. But instead of you confidently playing, you have this confusion being, okay, is this wrong? But it's a person of authority that's doing it. But then when other adults or other people with authority see it, then you see the hand pulling away. It's like, okay, more confusion, like you mentioned. Maybe this isn't okay. So for
Mhm.
you to go from that experience into what you just told me, a marriage that's also abusive,
Yeah.
did you feel that, hey, why am I in these situations? Because I know sometimes people do say that, like you mentioned, they're thinking,
Mhm.
okay, maybe it's me.
Yeah.
Did that ever cross your mind?
I mean, for sure, there was this, I was desperate for love. I was desperate for validation. I was desperate for just some sense that I mattered. And that process of looking to the external for that, was where I was at in that journey. through my teen years. It was all about the boys and the girls, but all, and hanging out and like, can your love validate who I am? And unfortunately, what happens as a result of trauma, I mean, there's a million things that happens, but one of them is that you stop trusting your own kind of instinct or sense of self. The very first thing that gets taken away when somebody begins abusing you is choice. And again, when you're looking to authority, then you start to think, okay, how do I reconcile my lack of choice, that being taken away, and now I'm supposed to make choices, but I don't have a strong sense of self. I don't feel worthy or valuable. I don't feel deserving. And so, sometimes people will say to me in the program, like, oh, Rachel, like I always attract like the worst people into my life. And what I always say to them is like, no, you're not attracting anything. What actually is happening is, just imagine you're like standing in a line of people, and somebody who wants to cross boundaries, be abusive, take advantage, they don't scan this line and go, oh, her. Like, it's not written on your forehead, okay? What they do is they go to the first person in the line and they try to push those edges. They try to push those boundaries. And if that person has, confidence and self-esteem and skills for setting boundaries and limits, then that person will say, I'm not the one, no thanks. And then they go to the next person. And so in my life, for a long time, I felt like, well, this is just what I deserve. Take what you can get. Now what I understand is that in the space of me not knowing how to take care of me, I wasn't able to turn it away. I wasn't able to turn away the people that were going to harm me or abuse me, which thankfully I learned how to do, right? That's the good news. At the end of the day, like, you're not broken. It's not like you're just this vessel that continues to attract negative, bad things. It's just, we've got to learn those skills. And once we have those, those skills, I sometimes call it the bullshit meter. Like, you just have to have a bullshit meter and be able to say, nope, I'm not going for that. I'm not the one, keep moving. And as I have done that, the quality of the relationships that I have improved and improved and improved, to where now, the partner that I have today, again, like, what? Like, for real? I mean, nothing is, of course, we have our challenges. We're two human beings who have our own ideas and feelings and all that stuff, right? But being able to navigate that and come back again to places of respect and love and commitment is really helpful. And so, ultimately, my ex-husband, we were both young. He has his own traumas. I don't hold any, ill will to him. In many ways, he's responsible for getting me on the track to healing. He's also responsible for causing additional pain that I had to kind of work through and wounding to heal. So yeah, for me, relationships are so at the center of everything we do, and such a big part of all of the work that I do, because we spend relationship every day, time in relationship every day. So we want to
Every
just
day.
be really equipped and empowered to do that to the best of our ability.
I think, and that's a good point. And I think that it's tough because not everyone, and you probably come in contact with people who, we come in contact with so many people that go through this. There's so many people, it seems, that they have a very difficult time saying that it's not me. I don't deserve someone abusing me verbally, physically, emotionally, mentally, right? And I know a few of my friends, men and women, that have gone through it. I know some men that, they're emotionally, mentally abused, were there to end up taking pills to to deal with it. And some
Yeah.
other women, they were abused to the point where their self-esteem, and then they became something totally different than when you recognize them. And when you see people going through this abuse, especially,
Mm.
I'll use myself, especially for me, I know how they were before,
Yeah.
right? When you look
Yeah.
at someone going through it, like when it's full steam, right? Because, and you can talk to this, in the beginning, the abuse, it's subtle. You know, it's like, oh,
Correct.
Rachel, you're this, but tomorrow I buy you
Mhm.
flowers. Oh, Rachel, I don't like this on you because you look like this, but I buy you chocolates, I give you a compliment, or like your hair. It seems to be they tear you down a little bit, then they give you something to feel good, then they tear you down and tear you down to the point where,
Mhm.
as you mentioned, they take away your choice and you feel like you're enslaved to this
Mhm.
person because now they control your movement, they control your confidence, control your feel, and most importantly, they control your happiness.
Mhm.
So when I look at some of these people, like,
So
is this
true.
something that you see when you're dealing with it, when you're helping these people who are maybe having a difficult time, who may not have the big smile and the lots of energy that you have
Mhm.
now? Like, how difficult is it for these people going through it?
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah, it's extremely painful because I want to speak to something that's kind of tangent to what we're talking about, but related. So, you know, part of the complexity of abuse is we know that well over 90% of trauma happens within the family. It is somebody who is a trusted, known adult. And so what that sets up is, you know, my grandfather, certainly before the abuse started, but even as the abuse was happening and continuing, he wasn't just this monster that was like yelling at me and harming me and like, you know, terrorizing me. He was also still the guy who we went on the lawnmower with, you know, or we played or we watched TV together. And so there's this duality that everybody who's experiences abuse by somebody who they know and love will be sitting with and holding the complexity of. It would be easy in some ways if the person was just a monster, but they hardly ever are. They are complex themselves. And we are sitting in that complexity. I love this person. This person does these amazing things for me. And right alongside that, this person is harming me and hurting me. And then the repetition of that patterning in our adult relationships. It's just a patterning. And so in my relationships, I kept doing that, being with people who were hurting me and loving me. And because I was, let's say, familiar with that feeling, it didn't ding anything in me. It didn't set off any alarms for me. It was like, yeah, right. That, yeah. Like something's wrong here. Like it wasn't until years later that I was like, oh shit, that's not how it's supposed to feel. I remember one of the first dates I went on after I divorced, and he was being a lovely gentleman, you know, opening doors and these sorts of things. And I was blown away, Terrain. I was like, oh my gosh, you're like the best guy ever. Like you open the door and he looks me dead in the eyes and he goes, Rachel, you know that that's just like the bottom bar. I was
I've
like,
had
wait, what?
that I've had that same conversation when I've gone on dates. Some people, it's like you give them a compliment that is actually sincere, and it's like you made them want the feeling is like they just won the lottery, and you're like,
Yeah. So that's, I had to learn, I had to basically like get a whole new orientation to what I deserved, what was the bare minimum in relationship, and begin to understand that, you know, within that 10-year relationship, my remaining was very much all tied up with not believing that I deserved anything better, not believing that I could do it on my own. Definitely the isolation that happened, certainly the stripping away of family and connections, like that certainly added to that. But when we did divorce, I was sitting in my new apartment and all I had was a lamp and a sleeping bag at that point. And I'm looking at my life and thinking, my gosh, if something doesn't change, this is going to keep happening. And that was really just the turning point for me. I had this strong internal conviction of like, I have got to get my shit together like right now and do something about this. And I just became obsessed with trying to answer this question of how do I actually heal from sexual abuse? And so I began reading everything I could. Eventually, right, kids are growing up. And so my friend says, I think you need to go to grad school, which I was not excited about, but I was like, okay, probably right. So I did my master's in counseling psychology. And kind of along the way, I'm using myself as a guinea pig. I'm studying neuroscience. I'm starting to put some pieces together. I'm thinking a lot about what did not work for me in therapy. How did therapy let me down? And what I started to notice that I kept coming back to again and again and again was my absolute frustration with going into therapy, talking about the experiences that I'd had, feeling very stuck and unsure about what to do, how to solve it, and getting back from my therapist things like, well, how do you feel about that? What do you think you should do? Look inside for the answers. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I knew the answer, I would not be sitting here paying you hundreds of dollars, right? And I just realized that for me, that was the piece of the puzzle that was missing. The like, what do we actually do about it? Not just like, let's talk about it. That is a part of the process. But I just felt like this was setting people up to be stuck in this survivor stage forever, where you just keep regurgitating, keep revisiting, and keep talking about it again and again and again. And even counselors who literally said to me, this is a life sentence, you're just going to have to deal with it for the rest of your life. And I was like, what? That is not the right answer. And so as I began healing, and as I began to start to see, this is where my academics come in a little bit handy, right? As a teacher, my job was to create curriculum, to figure out how to move from a theory into practice, right? Integration, how to become unconsciously conscious of something, and such that it becomes new habit and new pattern. You don't have to think about it. It just does. 2 + 2 is 4, right? That's only automatic because I've been doing it for years and years and years, right? But when you're
Absolutely.
little
Yeah,
and you're learning it, it's awkward, it's not familiar. And then, so I just started to think about abuse as an injury. And what started to happen with that reframing is I just kept asking that same question. Okay, this part of me is injured. I don't trust. How do I heal that injury? What's the medicine? What's the tool? What's the mindset? What's the strategy? What's the practice? And that started to happen for everything. Shame, releasing the sense of being at fault, having a hard time communicating, emotional regulation. Ooh, I was a mess. I was like all over the place on the emotional roller coaster for days, right? Like all of those pieces. And that's really important because, you know, if you think about it, if you fall and you break your leg, you get that injury, you don't go home and just say, well, all right, I guess I'm gonna have to live the rest of my life with a broken leg. Nobody does that. You like, okay,
oh no,
right?
not at all. Like you want some form of normality, and most of the time you want to get back to how life was before that injury,
Yeah.
right? And that's a, and I love that example. I think that's a way that we need to start viewing trauma, like look at it a little bit differently, right? It's like, for me, I guess my trauma would be I grew up without my mother or father, right? I was raised by my grandmother. I didn't know my parents until later on in life, years later. Um, and I had, if you break it down, you have two choices. I let it destroy me,
Mm,
or I overcome it.
mm,
Every other choice in between is just relating to one or the other, right? Because
totally.
you see, because you're in academics and I love numbers. You've seen the statistics, like it's poor. It's when it comes to potential. It's ideally based on the numbers, children from two parents home perform better than single parents, right? A
Yes.
child that doesn't grow up with either parent shouldn't even be anything, right?
Oh,
Based on the
no.
numbers now.
Yeah.
But is it that some people look at it and say, okay, you know what? I have this trauma. I'm just gonna say this is my trauma, and if I don't do well, it's because of the trauma. Yes, trauma is bad, and we're not saying it's not bad. It's very difficult. You know what? It can impact your life for years and years and years. But one thing I think many of us can agree is that there's gonna come a point where you have to say, you know what? I need to overcome my trauma. And it's better to do it sooner than later, because if you're in your 40s, 50s, you're going to go through how many relationships where
Mhm.
it's going to be brought in there, right? Because regardless of what people may think, we all bring things from our past into every interaction that we deal with. That's just human nature. But you want to
Yeah.
minimize the impact. Like if you and I were dating and I had a bad experience with women that look like you, it would be unfair for me to judge you based on my trauma because my trauma is my trauma. You may look at me like Train's crazy. Like I didn't do any of this,
Don't put that on
right?
me, Trey.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't do
Yes.
anything to you. This is just date number two.
Mhm.
But you know, but
Yeah.
for you, and you're able to overcome it, get married, go through that, and now you're in a relationship and you're doing amazing. What do you tell the people that don't have that success story, that is still going through bad relationship number two, bad relationship number 10, that is still feeling isolated, that is still feeling sad? How are you how are you
Hmm.
taking your personal experiences to help them? Because I'm pretty sure you have a plan, because it seems like it's easier to develop a plan for ourselves, but take that same plan and apply it to others. How are you helping them,
Yeah.
Rachel, through the process?
Well, the first thing I would say is we always have to be most kind and most gentle with ourselves, with wherever we are in that journey. I spent many years in denial, many years in avoidance, many years in just sitting in the pain and feeling helpless and feeling hopeless. And what's really so is that I have a colleague of mine who says everyone can heal, but not everyone will. Because there are some very real factors that create like I'm trying to think of like the right word here, but I'm just going to say a cacophony is the word that's coming to mind, like and creates this like momentum and this energy for change and healing. We have to have support, even if there's just one trusted person in our life, one trusted space where we can start to show up and get help and talk about the things that we've experienced. This is one of the reasons why I do a free monthly support group. Nobody's turned away for lack of funds, because if nothing else, there is one place in this world where you can land and you can talk and you can start to name and start to
It's
get a little
beautiful.
bit more comfortable, right? It's taking those like little baby steps that start to open you up to the possibility. Because when you're hopeless, it's really hard to take action. We have to have that hope. We have to have some little part of us that's saying things could be different, things could change. So we need support, we need glimmers of hope, we need resources. And our resilience and capacity and all those things can be built, but ultimately it's that moment of enough is enough. And we all get there in our own time, in our own way. But once you get there, then your job is to go after it like, you are just ravenous for healing, and seek out resource, seek out support. Um, I think for me, it had a lot to do with just this. I don't know, an experience is coming to mind where I had been talking with somebody about the abuse I experienced, and he said to me, "Oh my gosh, Rachel, you're such a survivor. You've been through so much, you've made it through so much." And in that moment, I was mad about that. I was enraged about being called a survivor. I was like, what are you telling me? Like, I don't want to just survive my life. I want to live my life.
Why
And
did
so
you feel like why did you feel that it was mad? Why did you get mad?
because I felt like survivor isn't enough. Survivor is a step in the process. Survivor is I can name and I can acknowledge, and I'm beginning to understand and connect to the reasons why I struggle with the ways that I do, and how it's related to past experiences. But I felt like there was this idea of like, well, now you've done enough. Like you're good now. I'm like, no, because at the end of the day, I'm still just coping. I'm still just getting through the day. What's next? And that's really where Beyond Surviving comes into play. So now this is the full length program. And over these 14 years, I've just continued to cultivate it and evolve it, spending a good amount of time really thinking about, like, what do we need to do when, in order to maximize healing and minimize re-traumatization. And that's one of the reasons why, well, also because I was a teacher, and so my brain just kind of thinks in terms of curriculum and scaffolding learning. But that's one of the reasons why Beyond Surviving is a step-by-step process. It's very different from therapy in that way. And so, the monthly support group is a great place for people who they're in those earlier stages, like you were talking about. Like, I'm in it. I can't seem to see my way out of it. I barely have any hope that there could be something different. And so that support group, my Facebook group, the podcast that I do, like, all of those are great resources to kind of just start dipping your toe into this world of, like, maybe things could be different.
How does it feel that you're someone's support system and you're someone's resource? How does that make you feel?
I mean, what a blessing. What an absolute gift that people even say yes. It still amazes me today. I mean, after all this time, I have more confidence about the work I do and the, how effectual the program is and the benefits and the outcomes, the long-term outcomes. That's not just like, oh, it's a one thing you do and then it goes away. Because I keep up with my clients year after year after year. To sit with somebody in their pain and in their wounding is the deepest honor. It's not something I take lightly ever, particularly in the early day when there's this moment, people are really taking a leap of faith, because most importantly, a lot of people who come to me are the people who I've tried everything. I've done this and I've done this and I've done this and I've done this, and it's helped a little, but then it doesn't. And they're really in a lot of ways like, if this doesn't work, that's it for me. So I never take it lightly, but oh my gosh, what a rewarding experience it is to sit. And honestly, at the end of the day, all I am is just a mirror that's like, I'm trying to reflect. Yes, I teach. Yes, I give very specific tools. Yes, I do some very like direct, like this, not this. But ultimately, it's really just about helping them clear away all of the layers of crap that have been added on that is hiding them from themselves. Healing is pretty much 90% unlearning everything you learned as a result of trauma and learning some new things, learning who you are, learning how to connect, learning how to trust, learning how to express yourself, find your voice, learning that you are beautiful and amazing and badass and not letting anybody tell you different, like all of these things. And so, like, one of my clients, when he started, he said, Rachel, I want to just skip the relationship stuff. I can laugh about it now, but I was like, wait, what? Why do you want to skip on? He's like, oh God, I've been married, I've been divorced, I'm over it. I think I'm just destined to be single. Whoa, like, that is a committed way of thinking about yourself and your future and what's possible. So I said, let's just cross that bridge when we get there, because we do things in an order. So by the time we got to the relationship work, he was open to exploring it. He is now married and has a little boy.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah. And like, that's just one of thousands of stories that I can tell. I particularly love, my parents who start passing on the Beyond Surviving tools to their little ones. Women who go out and have their own babies by themselves. I have multiple women who have done that. I'm not waiting anymore for a partner. I'm going to go do it. I'm going to have the family that I want to have. We call them our little Jedi in training. So there's this whole community. And this is where it gets really beautiful. Like with my graduates, they start connecting with each other outside of our calls. Right. So they start building their own moments of relationship and being with each other. And I start to fall more and more and more to the background, which is when I get super excited, because it's not about me. It's not about come to me for the answers. It's about learning how to self-resource, getting perspective when you need it from somebody who's not in the middle of it, but ultimately building other relations such that ultimately you don't need me at all.
How are you able to continue forward with this? Because it seems like to me, and for those listening, it seems like it's a lot of work, and you're not short of dedication and commitment. That's obvious in my conversation with you that you love what you do and you're so dedicated and you're so passionate. Um, when you're preparing your clients for the next step, ultimately hoping they get the relationship that they want, the relationship that's going to make them happy, how do you take them along that journey?
Hmm. Well, I usually tell them, don't look to your relationship to make you happy. That's where we always start. That's where we're starting from. We already got a problem. So, relationship is meant to complement and supplement our lives, not complete us. And this is how we can find ourselves in unhealthy relationships, because we're putting something on the other person that is not their job. Ultimately, if you think about imagine it just like a well, and this is your well of self-worth, your well of value. And so many of us get into this idea that there's something external that then fills that space. Maybe it's tasking, maybe it's success, maybe it's money, maybe it's relationship. We can use all sorts of things to say, if I have this, then I will finally feel good enough. If my partner finally does this, then I will finally feel like I matter and I'm good enough. So one of the things that we absolutely work on in Beyond Surviving is separating that out. Value is intrinsic. It is something that you own, not something that you earn. And when you get that, then you can also understand how your joy, your happiness is not tied to the person that you're in relationship with. They can complement, they can supplement, but they're not responsible for it. So getting those kinds of mindsets is one piece of the puzzle. Doing lots of work around trust, intimacy, sexuality, vulnerability. When somebody who is a trusted person in your life violates that trust, then of course it's going to set up a patterning that's suspicion. And certainly myself and what I see in all my clients, we have what I call the vulnerability threshold. It's like, yeah, I can connect. Yeah, I can connect. Yeah, that's a little bit okay, but oh, you just hit my limit. And then once they hit that limit, you do all kinds of things. Mine was become a drama queen and throw temper tantrums, literally like fall down on the ground when I was in my 20s and, break apart the relationship. So we have to be able to expand our capacity for vulnerability. And as you were saying earlier, separate past and present. Neurologically, the brain doesn't have a sense of time in that way. So all of this sensory data that's stored on a neurological level is not time specific. I mean, this is exactly what a trigger is. Like maybe the person abusing you wore a certain cologne, and then 20 years later, you're walking down the street and you walk next to somebody who's wearing that same cologne, not the abuser. You're certainly not still the child. You're not even in the same town, but yet it sets off all of these neurological kind of firing and trickle down effects. And you can feel like you're right back there in that moment. And so you start to react and respond from that place of the past. So, I mean, a good amount of being in good relationship and thriving in relationship is being able to be present. Exactly as you were saying earlier. Don't get mad at me because I'm a redhead. Some redhead hurt your heart, years ago. Like I'm doing
Like when I was 14, so
right
on the slide. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, totally.
She didn't give me my term on the slide, so she pushed
Right,
me in.
right. Said those
Like
darn redheads. So
I know.
that is a practice, right? That takes mindfulness, it takes strategy, it takes skill. It doesn't happen on its own. But again, the good news is that we can learn all these things. That for me is so important, right? We have this idea that, oh, I should just know how to be in relationship. No, you shouldn't. This is not, I wish they would teach this in school. I needed that way more than algebra. Okay. Like, please teach me how to communicate. Who cares about A, double C? I don't even know. I forgot it all, you know, but they don't. Unfortunately, they don't.
Yeah, but you're
So,
right. Like I look at, and I was telling someone this in the same well, I was telling someone something similar to what you're saying about supplement and complement and complete. And I told them there's a difference, right? It's like you work a part-time job to supplement your main source of income, right? And I gave them the example when I date, and I was using me as an example, and I said that when I'm in a relationship, the person is to supplement me, meaning that if my happiness is at an 80, their job is not to get me from 80 to 90. Their job is not to get me from 80 to 70,
yeah.
right? Because they're there as part of me. I'm not looking to them, I'm not with them to make me achieve something that I can't achieve because one of two things is going to happen. One, I'm going to be codependent on
Mm,
this person, right? And for those who don't know about codependence, it's probably one of the most dangerous things you can come across in a
yeah.
relationship. And two, I'm going to start conforming myself to this person because now I'm so reliant on them because I'm with them because I'm wanting, meaning that there's a part of me that's incomplete and I'm putting this expectation on this person to complete me, right? And that's why I love the way you put it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I certainly, in my marriage, that was absolutely the case. If he said, "You look beautiful today," I was on cloud nine. If he said, "You're disposable and ugly," of course, I went right down the tubes. And so somebody else, I mean, the truth of the matter is that we're all human. And so what other people think about us or what other people say about us will have an impact. And so certainly what I'm always trying to do in my own life and supporting my clients in doing is find people who speak life. Find the people who lift you up. And when you start to come in and start to notice that this person has stopped doing that or doesn't do that, make some choices about that. Take care of yourself, protect yourself. And that too is a learned behavior, because when you haven't been protected, when you've been at the mercy of somebody else's choices, you often have this longing for somebody to come along and protect you and nurture you in the ways that you wish that that person who harmed you had. And so releasing that, grieving that loss, and then coming into your own power, your own purpose, being your own self-protector, then that helps you in making those choices and setting better boundaries and deciding what you're really going to let into your life.
How do you want to help protect the next generation of men and women
Mm,
from this type of abuse? Because
yeah.
we're seeing it, it's happening, but what safeguards would you suggest to them, or would you want to help them protect the next generation?
Mhm. Yeah, the prevention piece, I'll be straight about it. It feels like such a daunting task that I barely let myself dive into that space. I have great colleagues. I have great communities and great organizations who are really tackling that piece of the puzzle. And places like Ring, places like 1 in 6, places like trying to think like Leslie's Kids, they're really working with the younger generation and teaching them about consent, teaching them about safety, about choice, awareness. And all of these things. And so I love collaborating with these organizations to play a bit of a part in the prevention. What's really so is that, at the end of the day, I guess I might hold a somewhat pessimistic view about our capacity to stop trauma from happening, to stop abuse from happening. Really what I think about when it comes to children in particular is how do we embolden them to find their voice, to speak up, to have the awareness. When I was a nanny, like from the time the kids were very little, we were having conversations, right, about safe touch, what to do, even if I do something that you don't like, these sorts of things. And so the more parents can be educated, or caregivers can be educated, along with really just empowering our children to speak up and speak out, such that if something does happen, it isn't in the shadows for years, but can more immediately be addressed there, thus reducing the impact, of that trauma. Yeah, I guess that's where I land on that. Yep.
Absolutely. Do you think that may be a redefining of the trauma and what abuse is? And I'll ask the reason why I ask that is I mean I'm probably not as versed as you are because I don't have your experience, but the knowledge base between the two of us is there. So we know based on our experiences and our age, and of course our knowledge and our academic, what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. But that may differ from person to person. We can embrace between the two of us is perfectly
Mhm.
fine, but we can go, I can embrace someone else the same way, you can embrace someone else the same way, two different results,
Totally.
right? So it's not that I intended or you intended, it's just it happened, it's interpreted that way. Um, do we need a redefining and also on top of that, does the conversation and communication have to be stronger now than ever?
Oh my goodness, these are such good questions. So there's so many layers here. I mean, where do I even begin? So the first thing that comes to mind is how even within, you think about cultural differences and the ways in which love and affection and touch might show up differently between different cultures. That can play a role and have an impact on what somebody might think of as appropriate or inappropriate. Then there is, I mean, one beef that I certainly do have when I think about what are we teaching our children, how are we helping our children feel empowered and feel safe, is the idea of good touch, bad touch. I don't think that languaging is actually effective or helpful when trying to talk with children about what might happen to them and what they might experience and what to do about it, because of the very fact that specifically around sexual trauma, the touch feels good. And of course, that's one of the complexities of sexual trauma, is again, the confusion. My body is responding in a positive way to this touch because that's what our bodies are supposed to do. That's how we're built. But it's within the context of something that creates that dissonance because it's not supposed to be you. It's certainly not supposed to be now at this age. And so, but so to teach a child, there's good touch and there's bad touch, it's actually, I think, quite confusing. And so what's the alternative? How do we language that instead? Looking at those sorts of nuances and beginning to think about what is the actual situation? What is actually going on? What does a child actually need to know about their body and about when, it's okay for somebody and when it's not okay? What's really so kind of talking around it, I'm getting there.
I love it. I love it. Keep going. Keep going. I got time. I told you, I
Yeah,
got time.
that time. What's really so is that you'll never, ever, ever be able to account for every circumstance and every situation that a child might be put in. And that this is a evolving conversation. One thing I always say to my parents is this is not a conversation you get to have once with your child and you're done. Like, put it on the calendar. Every 6 months, we're going to have a conversation about your body, about sex, about this, about that. Because the complexity of what feels okay and what feels safe and what feels like, again, this word appropriate, and the child being able to distinguish between, I don't know it at all, these definitions, these words, but what I know is that I don't feel safe.
And that's the big piece,
Yeah.
huge piece.
Yeah. And so if we can help children understand and connect into their intuition, and quite frankly, adults too, right? Both my male and female clients struggle with this in their own relationships, listening to those instincts. and not succumbing to the, well, I should be okay with this. It's just an innocent little thing, right? Like whatever. But no, ultimately, at underneath any of it, there's the sense of I do not feel safe. Then we've got a problem here. So perhaps that's the lens, and that's a way of beginning to kind of change the conversation, as you were kind of talking about, like, what do we need to do differently?